Hello everyone. I'm going to work on chapter 4 in our Excel, MS Excel. This chapter is probably my favorite because it's actually about pictures and then using pictures to depict numbers is probably the most fun I'll ever have in Excel. And hopefully this will be a fun chapter for you. So we're going to be working on chapter 4, presenting data with charts. Um, so our learning objectives are going to be straightforward. We're going to construct a line chart, so time series and trends, learn how to adjust the y-axis, construct a line chart. We're going to learn how to use column charts and to show frequency distribution and create separate charts that are embedded in the worksheet or not embedded in the worksheet. We're going to create some column charts that compare frequency distributions and do some pie charts to show percent of total. We're going to construct another type of column chart, which is stacked, and it will show percent total changes. We're going to apply some formatting to the axis, both X and Y. We're going to use some formatting to enhance the visual appearance of our charts and apply labels and other techniques to make sure our chart is clear to be understood by others who read it. Finally, we're going to apply formatting and employ some line annotations to enhance trends and some other trends and information we want to include on our chart. We're going to construct a scatter chart, and basically what we're going to be working with is knowing what type of chart to use for what type information we want to convey to our users. Whether it be a scatter chart, whether it be a bar chart, whether it be a pie chart, whether it be a frequency distribution type of chart or a line chart. So it really depends on what we're trying to do, what we're trying to show. And so what we're going to do first is, my first is make sure we learn how to add trend lines to our scatter chart, and then we're going to also paste it into our Word document or into a PowerPoint slide. And it's very easy to do, but it's always a big deal to have one document to have all our information. So embedding a chart into our Word document is very, very useful and highly efficient use of our skills. So I think it would be best to learn how to do that. And also we can include our chart into a PowerPoint slide, and it's very easy to do. Okay, time series trend. Again, the big thing you need to learn here is choosing the proper chart type. And depending on what you're trying to show, I mean, Excel has so many different choices that you can use to create your chart. So really you have so much variety as to how you want to show the information on your chart and which chart you're going to use. But there are some recommendations. So if you want a line chart that shows trends, we can use a line chart, and it actually shows information in a way that people can understand. And I think the goal will be, why do you do it? We want to be able to show a trend over time. We want to be able to be effective in how we show information. And the rule of thumb really is going to be, when we have information, we want to be concise. We don't want to have too much information because it will be very difficult to understand and interpret, but it also is difficult to read. So we want to make sure that when we use line charts that it has enough information but not too much to overwhelm the reader. Adjusting the scales. Again, when we're working with charts, it is going to be necessary to change or modify the axis. And the axis is going to be one side of the chart, and the other side is going to be, or the vertical side or the horizontal side. So making changes to those columns or to those axes is going to be important in learning how to do that. When we're dealing with frequency distribution, how often is some number repeated? Sometimes using occurrences, we can put our chart in categories or put the information in categories to show the number of occurrences. And again, the bar chart versus the column chart, there are a lot of hard and fast rules as to why we use what we use, what chart will be best. But at the end of the day, the main point I would say is which chart reflects the picture that most closely relate to the numbers. Which one's most easy to read, and then what is the purpose of the information that you're trying to show in pictorial form. And that in many ways will guide what chart you use. And you can look at the list here in front of you, and I'll give you some other ideas as to why you would use a bar chart versus a column chart. When we create a chart, again, we have the insert module within our Excel spreadsheet. So it's not really hard to insert a chart. The main thing I would say is determining the data, which information is going to be on the x-axis and what's going to be on the y-axis, what's going to be the dependent variable and what's going to be the independent variable. But in all, we want to create a worksheet, and it's going to be, and we can make certain that the chart can be inside of the worksheet itself, or the Excel worksheet, or we can, by embedding it, or we can give it a separate sheet all to itself. It's totally up to us, and depending on what we're the message we're trying to convey to our users, we will determine how we put where those charts will reside. I love pie charts because pie charts gives us a percent of whole, and when you're trying to show a piece of a whole, pie chart provides the best picture. It relates to a whole, and particularly when you have about spending or how much money is in a budget, a pie chart really does give you a good picture of one part of a whole or several parts of a whole, or what makes or the components of what make up a whole. And again, percent of totals and trends look very well and are very well understood when they are put in a stacked column chart. And I think that's probably the most frequently used type of chart. But I do have a favorite, and I think pie charts are my favorite, mainly because I use charts of that nature to depict percent of total. But a stacked column chart is very, very useful, and I use that as well. And it does give you some kind of percent of total changes over time. And the main thing with dealing with charts is make certain that you get the information that you need and that you select it, and only what you need when you're trying to create a chart. And this is just to let you know that when the x-axis is going to be using labels. Labels is pretty much alpha characters describing something like grades or sex or race or anything like that. Those are kind of descriptive labels, not necessarily a number. And then the actual y-axis would be, in this case, the grades would be from 90 or from 50 to 100, that type of thing. And what this is just trying to convey is be very careful of how much you put into your column or your bar chart. What we don't want to do is use a picture to confuse people. So the pie chart that is most simple and most easily understood is the chart you should use. We're going to go past these questions and answers, but I do urge you to go through them to make sure you understand what you have read, and that to evaluate your understanding, but also determine if you need to go back and revisit a couple topics. And again, when we create titles, it's definitely important to do that, because when we create titles, we make a distinction between what's the X and what's the Y. And of course, it's all about the reader. It's all about the person who's reading it and who's trying to understand the message that you're trying to convey. So adding labels is critical, a part of formatting your charts. Adding data series labels and formats, those are important too, because a picture should stand on its own 2 feet. So therefore, in the construction of your graphs, it needs to have the labels so that everybody can see straight on what it is and not have to assume anything. And again, we're just talking about, after we construct a graph, does it look like what we want? Does it provide us the integrity of the information? Does it not mislead? We don't want to mislead anything. We don't want to create a mixed message and mislead people to think something that's not correct. So it's very important that the construction of our worksheet is sufficiently accurate and reflects the information that we want to convey in the right way. Don't lead people to believe something that's not true, and don't mislead them by extracting information that should be included in your graph. So we're going to go through these questions, and again, I suggest strongly that you review them to just test your knowledge of the material that you've read. Now, the scatter chart is one of many, but this is the main heading, and it really does show trends, but it also shows values, quantitative values over time, and you can actually show that with a straight line or a curve. And those curve graphs kind of show a trend or the relationship between two variables. So when you're talking about supply and demand, for example, those types of scatter charts are going to show the relationship. As one changes, what's going to be the impact on another change in that on the other. So it does do a cause and effect, and it's quite useful when you're talking about understanding why something is happening and what's going to be the effect if we make changes in one area. So it's an independent variable, and how is the dependent variable changed by the independent variable. Now, one of the things that I think a scatter chart you should know about a scatter chart is what it does provide to the reader and what it doesn't. When you're trying to assess whether or not something is frequent, although you can use a scatter chart, it's far better to use a bar chart because it's easy to understand. A scatter chart really does not clearly help you see trends, but it does show relationships between changes in either two variables and those changes over time. So it does reflect well with trends. And these are just more changing the scale of X and Y axis. This is just really taking your chart and making it show very clearly the minimum and maximum values, and be able to show how they look in a scatter chart. Using the trend line really does try to predict where a point may occur along an axis. So adding a trend line is additional information, and it is helpful in some situations so that you can provide an equation as to what a trend is. And what I could think of would be probably a good example would be if you're trying to assess, if you're trying to predict something, you're trying to predict what a value will be, and you're trying to show what your prediction is in a chart. The trend line can give you that straight line, which was this MX, the straight line um, of equation that shows you what types of things or what kinds of points that needed to bring this trend to a straight line. So it's more using a scatter chart is used for predicting, used for looking forward, looking the future, and trying to assess what a change would look like if it had occurred. So it's really good with if scenarios and what if scenarios and predictions. And here are some questions on the scatter chart that I think you should go through and make certain that you fully understand before proceeding to using more of the charts. Now, before we get started, I want to just make clear that Excel and Word are interchangeable. Therefore, embedding charts from Excel to Word or PowerPoint are as simple as pie. They're not hard at all. In fact, that's sometimes the most efficient way to give information to another user by putting it in one file. So that's an efficient way of using that. So as we conclude this chapter, I want to make clear to you that this is probably the most fun chapter. It's the funnest chapter because we're creating pictures. But before we do finish that, I want to also mention that continue to read a chapter and try to exercise some practice and go through it over and over again and practice, practice, practice. But this is going to be the fun part of Excel, and we'll be wrapping up all of your knowledge into showing your Excel work in a picture. And the picture should always be more clear and not misleading. And I thank you very much for your time.